I'd like to welcome everybody to the third annual PAC Fall Program. The program's titled the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Cultural Resource Programs in Pennsylvania. Today we're going to have three separate presentations. The first by Nikki Minnichbach and Glenn Weitknecht, who will present on behalf of the Philadelphia District. Following that, we'll have Eva Falls and Ethan Bean talk about the Baltimore District. And then finally, we'll have Michelle Zulauf to present on the Pittsburgh District. Please submit, if you have questions, please submit those questions through chat. We'll have question sessions after each region and then another set of questions at the very end of the program. This will be video recorded for our YouTube channel. And if you are watching this and you are not a PAC member, you are allowed to stay, but please consider joining PAC sometime soon. Without further ado, we'll have Nicole Minnichbach and Glenn Weitknecht present on the Philadelphia District.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been ages since I've presented at a PAC meeting, so it's great to be here with all of you. Although I do support our planning and civil works projects as well as operations, I thought the best focus for today would be with our regulatory permit process and the program we put in place for those permit actions. Glenn, who's presenting with me, is one of our regulatory section chiefs. He'll start out the discussion by explaining our permit process, and I'll discuss my part in working with regulatory permit actions after.
Okay, start off by introducing myself. My name is Glenn Weitknecht. Like Nikki said, I'm a section chief with the Philadelphia District right now. I've worked for the Corps for close to 20 years now in the regulatory program. I did several years in the Galveston District down in Texas. That's actually where I met Nikki. And moved back here to the Philadelphia District in 2007. The Corps has two main laws that we provide permits under, that we regulate. The first is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and under that regulation, we regulate the discharge of any fill material or anything that's going to alter the bottom elevation of the water of the United States. And that will include wetlands, other special aquatic sites, and below the ordinary high water mark of streams and any tidal areas is kind of a rough nutshell of what we regulate there. We also regulate Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act from 1899. And under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, we're going to regulate any work that's going to affect navigation, which will also include the placement of fill and any structures or other kind of work that would affect the navigability of the waterway. And that is where then we link into the Section 106 program. Obviously under the National Historic Preservation Act, the federal government has to comply with that law, and in that there is a language that says that if you're providing any kind of permit, funding, or anything like that, you have to be in compliance. So since we are providing a permit or a license, we must be in compliance with Section 106. Go ahead, Nikki, to the next slide. Okay. In that permitting, we have two types of Department of the Army permits, or two main types that we issue. One is standard permits, and those are your larger projects, your heavy duty projects that maybe have some controversy to them. They are your highest level of review for those permits. They also consequently take the most time to issue. They have the most public involvement and are usually with the largest scope of involvement. We also issue a lot of general permits. Those are for smaller activities. We have several types of general permits that we issue. We have regional general permits, which a district can put together, which are for, a district can put that together for anything that they see a lot of in their district. For instance, in Galveston, we had a regional general permit for docks. We don't really have that in the Philadelphia district. We have a state permit for that in New Jersey, but not so much in Pennsylvania. We also have nationwide permits, which, as the name implies, are issued nationally for the entire country. For Pennsylvania, most of those get suspended because we have what the first type there, the SPGP, which is a state programmatic general permit. Pennsylvania has had a state programmatic general permit for approximately the last 20 years that covers every type of work. It's issued by the Corps for use mostly by DEP, Pennsylvania DEP, to attach the federal authorization along with their state authorization. If you read the slide there, it says that GPs kind of have the lowest amount of review with them. And that's because under a GP, before we issue the GPs do go through a lot of programmatic work. And that's where we are actually right now with the Pennsylvania State General Permit. Is we're in the process of reissuing that for the upcoming 5-year period. And we've undergone quite a few programmatic consultations with the state SHPO and having all the districts involved with that. And that kind of leads into the last statement there, bullet there at the bottom. While the SPGPs and nationwide and GPs in general don't have public notification, the public notification is done up front in the programmatic phase when that permit's being issued. But then as a consequence, when project-specific verifications of that permit are issued, there is no public notice or involvement because it's been already deemed that the project is of such a low level that there is not a need for that. Go ahead to the next slide, Nikki.
Okay. So what are the critical regulations we use for the regulatory program? Many of you already know that the Corps has their own implementing regulations for NEPA and Section 106 under 33 CFR 325. Appendix B covers NEPA and Appendix C covers Section 106, but we also use the 800 regs as well. So the Corps conducts Section 106 much like any other federal agency. We review the project, assess the area for the presence or the potential presence for historic properties. We research and investigate, and we make determinations of effect, and we coordinate with the SHPO, the tribes, and other consulting parties. So what makes the Corps process so different? Differences in our scope of analysis, or what we actually take into account based on a jurisdiction. The 800 regs have the area of potential effect for the undertaking. This usually includes not only the footprint of the project, but also ancillary activities, visual impacts, vibrational impacts, things like that. The Corps regulatory program has a permit area as its scope of analysis, which begins with the waters of the US. So we don't permit a project, we evaluate the impacts to the waters of the US under the Clean Water Act and the Rivers and Harbors Act. So that means we have to start the evaluation at the waters and then see if any other additional activities associated with the project are also within our jurisdiction. It's usually the regulatory program managers or project managers. They use the 3 tests as laid out in Appendix C to determine the limits of the Glenn, this one's for you.
Okay. As Nikki said, we use the 3 tests as they're laid out in Appendix C, and I'm not going to read each single one of them, but this is one of the hardest things we deal with for especially new project managers in generalizing how much of a scope do we bring in under 106. I mean, it's real clear and easy to get the federally regulated area I mean, that's obvious. But then how far out do we want to extend our scope into areas that we are otherwise not regulating any of that work? But because of the 3 tests, we may need to look at those areas, at least for Section 106 purposes, because of the work that we are authorizing will have some effect on those areas outside of our permit area. As Nikki said, we use the 3 tests to do that. And it's extremely challenging, especially for the less experienced regulators to get that. We're very fortunate that as a regulator, when we fill out our sheet, part of our process is to clearly state how each one of these tests is met, which you'll see when we get down to that part of the presentation. And you know, our regulators will work with Nikki to help work that through, but at the end of the day, that is up to the regulatory project manager to set that scope, and then we present that to Nikki to go ahead and do the review. So that's pretty much how we do it in our district. Go ahead, Nikki. I think the next slide.
It's me.
Is you, yeah.
Okay, so just to reiterate the core, don't permit projects, we permit for the impacts to the waters of the US. The APE for the undertaking may be larger or more encompassing than the permit area, but they may be the same depending on the extent of the impacts of the waters of the US. So part of the reason why I was hired by Philly District was based on my experience at the Galveston District, which is where I was working both with planning undertakings as well as permit actions. So when I started at Philly, I worked with the regulatory section chiefs to develop what, you know, we just call it the internal review process, got that big name there. So basically for every permit application we receive, the regulatory project manager will fill out this form with relevant information that I use to make my initial determination. They'll provide a discussion of the overall project, a verbal description of the permit area, along with a figure defining the limits, and also any other information that could assist in my review. SHPO opinion letter, photos, use this information along with online cultural resource databases to make my initial determination, which I then coordinate with the SHPO and the tribes. So one thing that was interesting when I got SHPO clearance letter, it seemed to me that it was kind of backwards. So putting this program in place kind of redirected the regulators to understand that it's the lead federal agency that makes the determination in consultation with the SHPO, the tribes, and other consulting parties. So based on what I've found through my initial assessment, I'll make a decision, which could be any of the following statements on this form. If it's something that may be of interest to the tribes, I email their TIPO or their Tribal 106 reviewers this completed form along with any other documentation. So they have the initial sheet along with this, which has the determination. We usually end up, if an investigation is needed, we'll contact the applicant and let them know that they need to hire a CRM professional to conduct the work, but we will continue to assist the applicant through the Section 106 process all the way through. Before COVID-19, I used to meet with the Pennsylvania SHPO reviewers on a monthly basis, so we could all just sit down and talk about the process as we're working through each one of these individual permit actions. So this was just a brief look into how we conduct our Section 106 review for the Philly District Reg program. So I guess that's where I am.
Thank you. we don't have any questions in the chat. I do have a question though. Could you clarify how the Corps decides to initiate Section 106 in addition to Appendix C? Or is that the 3 tests that you were talking about earlier? And yeah, when do you go beyond its Appendix C and invite the public and whatnot? Does that make sense?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Well, I'll take a stab at it here. I think for a standard permit, either the letter of permission or a regular individual standard permit, there is a public input phase that's built into those permits. So of course that goes out on public notice and we can get no involvement from anybody. On the general permits, we have that input put in place in the programmatic development of the permit, where we put them out on a public notice usually and get that that involvement, but not on each project specific verification. With that said, if there is something involved in those projects, let's say it's a general permit, an SBGP that comes in and I fill out the review form, I send it over to Nikki. If there is a known resource in that area, or even if it's just a probability that she feels that there should be testing done, then she moves that project forward, and we get with the applicant to advise them that, you know, there's more testing that needs to be done. It could come also from the SHPO in the sense that when the applicant applied to DEP, the PA DEP, that DEP or the SHPO recommended additional testing, and then it gets forwarded to the Corps as a what we refer to as a reporting activity instead of being non-reporting, where it comes to us to resolve that additional historic work that needs to be done before we issue the permit. Does that answer what you needed there, Casey?
Yeah, it does. I've had, I think it's just a difference in district, maybe. I don't know. I've had projects where there are resources in the area and the AP is often, and the scope of the project in general is often limited, and Appendix C is often given as the excuse, you know, that the area that you're filling in is the APE, which is said, I mean, it's clear in Appendix C that that's what it is. Section 106 offers a little bit of a broader interpretation of what your APE is. And so it seems to be that there's 2 parallel things going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think generally speaking, you know, the regulatory side always wants to shrink that APE as small as possible.
Right.
And that's where I think, like, for at least for the Philadelphia district, it's great having Nikki, because she balances us there and says, no, you know, you need, in this case, you need to be bigger, or in this case, it's okay. So like I said, we work closely with her in establishing that for our district. Now, obviously, I can't speak for what goes on in the other districts. You know?
Yeah, clearly, that one thing that I wanted to add was also, it does say in Appendix C that we will take into account the effects within the uplands as well. So sometimes you can work with the NEPA side of 33 CFR, like the Appendix B, which discusses scope of analysis, which also kind of gives a broader base to that. But like I said, it's a very difficult manner of coming up with the permit area, but at least we're trying to be consistent as a district.
Great. Does anybody have any other questions? Well, thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Nikki.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Next up, we have Eva Falls and Ethan Bean from the Baltimore District.
All right, let's see if I can share my screen. And Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right.
Good.
So, hi everyone, I'm Eva Falls and Ethan is with me today. And we're going to talk about the Baltimore District. I'm going to give a brief overview of our district as a whole. I don't think that Baltimore District's presented at a PAC meeting, and well, definitely since we've been here, it's probably been a very long time if we have. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the district. Ethan's going to really focus in on our civil works missions. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on our military support and our interagency support as well. We're not going to go too far into the regulatory world since Nikki and Glenn just did a great presentation. Our district operates, sort of similarly. So we'll talk about some of the other things that the Corps does. So the Baltimore District, I don't know how familiar people are with the Corps of Engineers, but we have a wide variety of services and authorities that we operate under. The Baltimore District specifically is a full service district. So anything that the Corps of Engineers does, we do in the Baltimore District. So we're a little bit one of the larger districts. For civil, our area of responsibility is the watersheds of the Susquehanna River. And we also are responsible for the watersheds of the Potomac River. So we go all the way from Northern Virginia up into New York State with our area of responsibility. And this map here shows some of our projects, our dams, our reservoirs, some of their locations. So you can see we're very spread out. We also support construction. We are the builders for the military. We have 14 military installations we support. So we also do design and construction and environmental service for anything they need. We have a huge real estate office. We do real estate actions for other districts, other military agencies, and also other general federal agencies. We help them with their real estate actions. We respond to natural disasters and do emergency response. So we have robust deployment opportunities to respond to disasters. We have actually a very specialized environmental cleanup team. We actually have an international team in our district that helps decommission nuclear reactors. And then we also run the Washington Aqueduct, which is very cool. We provide drinking water to the District of Columbia for national security reasons. And we still operate that. So that's another really cool mission that the Baltimore District has. But as you can see, most of the Chesapeake Bay, a very large portion of it, is within our area of responsibility. So we have lots of water, lots of coastline, so we get to be involved in a very wide variety of projects. All right, Ethan, do you want to talk about our civil works mission?
Sure thing. So as Eva said, my name's Ethan. I help out with the civil works support side of our mission. But before going into our specific programs, here's just a slide going over a broad overview of our civil works properties and the kinds of things that we support. So, I mean, we do water resource planning, engineering design, construction projects focused on navigation and flood control projects, and then also environmental and ecosystem restoration. And so we have 290 miles of navigation channels, 148 miles of levees, and then also within the district, we have 15 dams and reservoirs. And so, I mean, there are only 2 of us, and we have a large area to cover. And so to manage the cultural resources for these kinds of projects, for us, we're able to do a lot of the background research and the phase 1 work in-house, but then typically we'll contract out the work that goes a little beyond that, maybe the phase 2s, phase 3s, and then any underwater work goes beyond us as well. But here's just a small list of the cultural resources support we provide. Okay, next slide. Okay, so environmental and ecosystem restoration. The map on the right here shows our civil works boundaries in Pennsylvania. Those boundaries, like Eva said, they do extend up into New York, but they also go down into Maryland. But this gives you a sense of the Pennsylvania boundaries. One of our main types of projects that we do are these larger environmental and watershed studies or assessments, where we will go in and we'll look at a watershed or a series of related watersheds to try and provide recommendations for water-related issues that people might be having. So an example of this here is the Chesapeake Bay Comprehensive Plan, which looked at quite a number of watersheds within the Chesapeake Bay watershed to provide those recommendations. And then for ecosystem restoration, I wanted to highlight Poplar Island, which I think was actually shown in a few slides back. But this was a project where the goal was to really find this beneficial use for material that was being dredged out of the Chesapeake Bay. And the overall goal was also to restore Poplar Island to its original footprint. And they succeeded in doing that. And so it kind of has now branched off into other projects where they're trying to restore other islands in the Chesapeake Bay in the same way. Okay, so those are the little overview of the larger watershed studies, but we also do these smaller CAP studies, which CAP stands for Continuing Authorities Program. These are projects that are much smaller and more limited in their size and cost. They typically begin when a non-federal sponsor or community comes to us asking to help them solve a water-related issue. And so one of the examples in more recent years that I had was a CAP project in Windsor and York County, which there was flooding coming out of Fishing Creek along Main Street there, if you're familiar with it. And they applied through this program to get some help. And so the table here, hopefully you can see everything in there, but there are various CAP authorities that each deal with different project types, basically. And so, I mean, they range from navigation improvements to stream bank erosion. So, I mean, for example, if your community was dealing with stream bank erosion problems and you wanted help to fix that from us, you would apply through Section 14. It's that kind of thing. Now, navigation, I don't have anything about navigation listed on this slide, but I did want to touch on it a little bit. As we said previously, we maintain over 290 miles of federal channels, and most of those are in Maryland, and I don't think any are in Pennsylvania. I mean, our biggest ones are the 50-foot channels that go through the Baltimore Harbor and then through the Chesapeake Bay. But then we have numerous shallow draft channels as well. Okay, next slide. Flood risk management. So our flood risk management program, this is where our dams and levees fall into. Baltimore District, we have 15 dams and reservoirs. 9 of those fit into Pennsylvania. And those are listed here. Some of these have a recreational component to them, mostly Raystown, Kerwinsville, and then I'm pretty sure Tyler Hammond as well. But then others like Indian Rock are just really for flood control, and they just consist of the dam and its associated features. Another program we have is our Section 408 program, which allows others to modify existing USACE projects. So an example of this might be if a local community was proposing to build a culvert or some sort of drainage structure or something near one of our levees, then they would go through this program and apply for it that way. And then the PL 8499 program, this deals with helping to fix damage to flood risk management projects. And I guess in ones that I've worked on, it's more of an emergency response kind of program to existing projects, where if something was damaged during a storm event and they really just want to address that as soon as possible, they can go through this program. So an example I have here, I actually mislabeled it, sorry, it's Scranton, PA, PL 8499, but this was the drainage basin in Scranton before a storm event, and then it was ultimately damaged, and they went through this program to get some help with that. Okay, next slide. Civil work support in the Section 106 process. So now that we have this overview of what kind of projects Baltimore District handles, I can go into how they fit into our overall planning process and then how the Section 106 process fits into that. So all the projects I mentioned previously, they go through this process known as SMART planning. And this is the process we use to develop project recommendations. And so this is typically divided into 6 steps, and then the Section 106 process is basically occurs throughout each of those steps. So step 1 here, it's the process of us actually getting the request to help solve a problem or receiving an authorization to study a specific issue or area. So for Section 106 purposes, this is where we really get that first idea or that general sense of where a project might take place. So then going on to the second step, this is project scoping and information gathering. So this is where we're trying to gather as much initial information as we can so that we can develop alternatives. And it's in this stage where we start sending out initiation notices to kind of just say to people, hey, we're studying this area. This is the problem we're trying to address. And then we ask them for any initial input as well. And so for Section 106, we kind of hone in a little bit, and this is where we get a sense of what cultural resources might be there, or if any previous surveys have occurred in that area. And so the third step, this is where we develop an initial set of project alternatives. So think of it as our first draft, basically. Once we have these, then us as a cultural resources team can then go in and look and say, something might be specifically effective this way, whether that's directly or indirectly. And so after we have those alternatives, we can then coordinate with consulting parties and identify an area of potential effect, and also gather opinions and see what their input might be on what resources might be affected, and also to what degree they could be affected. So then the fourth step, I kind of see this as an extension of the previous one, but this is where we evaluate each draft alternative to see if any might drop out, maybe because they're just not feasible, or maybe it's just not an alternative that a community wants. And the information we receive through both Section 106 and NEPA processes inform that decision. And then the fifth step, once we have this list of draft alternatives that people want to pursue, we'll then compare them to each other and get this kind of pros and cons list, and see which may be more economically justified or feasible. And then that would ultimately lead to a tentatively selected plan. And so it's by this time that we typically have a set of recommendations saying what additional cultural resources and investigations might be necessary for each alternative. And then again, these decisions are all informed by the input we're receiving from consulting parties. And then in the last step here, this is where we're officially selecting a plan that we recommend. And so it's around here that if any additional cultural resources investigations were recommended or required, it's around here that that's where they would occur, unless we're doing some sort of agreement document situation that's a little different. But then again, as I've mentioned, going throughout each of these steps, I mean, we gather as much input and information as we can to help inform the alternatives. And then that's reflected here in the arrows that kind of weave their way in between each step. But yeah, that's all I had. That's just kind of a broad overview of the projects we support.
Excellent. Yeah, so when we do civil work support, a lot of times we're lucky because we're the lead federal agency, and we have lots of control, and we can help lead the process. But a lot of other agencies and Army installations, they do not have a cultural resources person on staff or on hand who understands the 106 process or how these, all of these different cultural resources laws, how they work. So Ethan and I also support all of the military installations within our AOR as subject matter experts. Anytime they need assistance, they pick up the phone and they come to us. And a lot of times we can support them in-house. Sometimes we help them with contract support. But we do, I mean, a lot of other districts just because of their geographic location, don't have a large military mission. Baltimore, for better or for worse, is geographically gifted in some ways, or cursed, depending on your, your perspective. So we actually do a lot of military work. We also do a lot of NEPA support to these installations as well for their projects. And then our our counterparts in our engineering divisions and our construction divisions actually do design and construct different projects on military installations. So usually a lot of our work, we help our installations come up with integrated cultural resource management plans. We do architectural and archaeological surveys. We help them do determinations of eligibility for their Section 110 responsibilities, where they are required to evaluate what they have that is National Register eligible. And also how can they best protect those resources or use them wisely. And then a lot of times we help facilitate the Section 106 process. We walk them through it. We help them communicate with consulting parties. We help them draft agreement documents just to make sure that they're checking all of the boxes when they should be checking the boxes. So but at the end of the day, they are the lead federal agency. So we're just really there as, extra staff on their teams. So I wanted to point out two examples. Recently, we have Carlisle Barracks, which is in Pennsylvania and Carlisle. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. They have a National Register district, and they also have a National Historic Landmark district. And those districts sort of overlap. And they are the home of the U.S. Army War College. So back in 2018, they determined they needed a new general instruction building for the Army War College. And we helped them write an environmental assessment with our NEPA team. And we also helped them walk through the 106 process, because we determined based on the viewshed of this giant new building that could have an adverse effect on the National Historic Landmark District and National Register District. So we worked with all of the consulting parties to find ways to minimize or mitigate those visual impacts on the rest of the historic districts on the installation. And then they entered into a memorandum of agreement, executed that, and had some mitigation stipulations that they're working on. And that building is currently under construction. So we worked with National Park Service, Pennsylvania SHPO, and several other parties. And it was a really successful consultation. We also provide support, not just for our Army friends, but for other agencies, other federal agencies who may not have cultural resource people on staff. We also get calls. So the Bureau of Engraving and Printing is part of the U.S. Treasury. We're currently helping them on a project in Maryland, where they are looking to build a new currency production facility. So our team is helping them put together an environmental impact statement, and we are leading them through the 106 process since they didn't have any cultural people on staff. And so it's been a really great experience, because you get to see how all these different federal agencies, how they operate as well, and how we can assist them making sure that they're in compliance and doing what they should do. So it's a nice way to get exposed to all different types of projects, even when we're not the lead federal agency. All right. So I think that was a nice brief overview of some of the things that Baltimore District does outside of our regulatory authorities. But of course, we are always available after this for questions. We love talking to people as well. So, and all right.
Thank you. We don't have any questions in chat. Does anybody have a question? Crickets? All right. Thank you. We're going to move on now to Michelle Zulauf with the Pittsburgh District.
I am going to share my screen. And where's my mouse? All right, went to run. Can you guys see it okay?
Yes.
Looks good.
All
Yep.
right. So first of all, it's my first time presenting a PAC. So I wanted, and it's my first time working in Pennsylvania. So I just want to take a minute or two to introduce myself. I'm a graduate from the University of Puerto Rico. That's where I got my undergrad, and I got a master's from the University of Massachusetts. I worked with Dr. Seitlin and Dr. Suleiman, and I love that program. I graduated in historical archaeology, so my interest is a lot of historics. I put a few of my favorite stuff there. I also, before working for the Corps of Engineers in Pittsburgh, I worked for the Corps of Engineers in South Carolina. I was actually the regulatory archaeologist. Here in this new position, I don't do a lot of regulatory work, but in South Carolina, that's pretty much all I did. And before that, I worked for the Forest Service in Virginia. And we just, we miss home. My husband's from Ohio. We have a growing family, wanted to come back Northeast, and took the plunge and got here right before the pandemic. So I spent a whole like 2.5 or 1.5 months or something like that in the office, and then we're here from home. So that's, that was the purpose of that. I wanted to point out that even though Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Philadelphia, we're really close to each other geographically. They're the Corps of Engineers, the broader picture, we're in two separate regions. The Corps of Engineers divides their regions by watersheds. So even though we're like next door neighbors, they are in the North Atlantic Division, while I am in the Great Lakes and Rivers Division, Ohio River Division. So I just want to point that out, that, we kind of have all different chains of command, and there's, we don't meet again until we get to headquarters. So that's just a kind of odd thing, because we are so close and in a way so far away, but we do work together sometimes. This is like a broad overview of the Pittsburgh civil works area of responsibility. Actually, regulatory's area of responsibility is different. I didn't bring a map, and I should have, but it is not by a lot, but a little different. So we're known as the Headwaters District. Our main purpose is to we manage the waters that flow into the Ohio River, the beginning of the Ohio River. We have 26,000 square miles. We spread over 5 states, including Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, Maryland, and we also extend into the Seneca Nation at north in New York. We manage 3 significant river systems, mostly for inland navigation: the Allegheny, the Ohio, and the Monongahela. We manage 328 miles of navigable waters. We have 23 locks and dams across the 3 different rivers. We have 16 multi-purpose flood risk management. There are also recreation areas, and we have 80 local flood risk management projects. So we are known, and I know everyone wants to change that, we are known as a operations management district. We have a lot of aging infrastructure, and we have such a built environment that we manage that we actually do a lot of operations and maintenance on our own structures. So a lot of my work is based around that. I am a part of a lot of development teams for projects that are within our area of responsibility, where we bring everyone together trying to find a solution. I do phase 1s just like Ethan and Eva in the consultation. We are starting, and I will talk to you a little about this later, cultural resources management plans for our wildlife flood protection areas. They have all been kind of dated. We do ARPA permits, and we look into violations. We have NACRA issues that we need to resolve. I am also the tribal liaison, and I've been working as well with artifact management that just kind of still lingering around. As of now, we have, just want to put a little bit, like a picture of what we have. Over 485 archaeological sites that is spread all across different types of periods. We have, like I said, a lot of aging infrastructure. So pretty much most of our locks and dams are over 50 years old. Some are over 100. And so that's there. And I just wanted to I thought I would just talk a little bit about the different projects that I have going on right now that might be of interest for you guys. And I just realized because I had to change to a Chromebook, and it kind of messed up my presentation there. But right now, the Great Lakes Ohio Division is going through the national regionalization effort, which is happening at all core districts. I don't know if North Atlantic Division's gone through it. They kind of go in this division by division. It is our turn. Basically, we are trying to identify the location of all the archaeological collections spread across ours. It was spread at least across 3 different states. And we're trying to consolidate them and come up with a curation, rehabilitation, and bring them up to standards and make sure that they are in facilities that are federally compliant. So that's one of the bigger things I'm handling right now. Just trying to find where they are, and this may be collections that are very, very old and just been stored at different universities or different repositories. And so that's happening at least in Ohio, Louisville, Nashville, Buffalo, and the other compadres I have in the Great Lakes Division. Like I mentioned, another one of my big projects is we will be putting together cultural resources management for at least 13 of our flood risk management areas. And that includes, I'm not even sure how, most of them are in Pennsylvania. So at some point we will start reaching out at local places, the SHPO and universities, and trying to bring in the community to kind of help us find the best way to manage these resources and kind of get that in there. My last 2, I already mentioned that, okay, hold on. I kind of went ahead and mentioned this before, like how we do all this different works of operation and management. For example, I brought this picture. Oh, sorry. Oh, I just keep going ahead. I use a Chromebook. So this particular example was a ramp that one of our lakes wants to expand. So I just put a few things I found. Like a lot of other districts, most of our lakes were built in areas that were previously towns or small little townships, and so we still find stuff. Finally, I wanted to talk to you about 2 of our biggest civil works projects that are happening in the Pittsburgh District. The Pittsburgh District has a big responsibility on navigation in inland navigation through Pennsylvania. And most of the navigation is happening mostly for commercial purposes, is barges moving and carrying materials across the river, either inland or going out to closer to the coast. So one of our biggest projects is called the Lower Monongahela Navigation Project. This project's been going for a while, where basically it's a 3-for-2, 2-for-3 project where we were going to eliminate Monongahela River Lock and Dam number 3, which is located in Elizabeth Township. This particular lock and dam was built in 1907. So it is a historic property, and we've been, we are in a programmatic agreement with the SHPO that we executed in 1992. And under that, we have a mitigation plan that we've been working on ever since. I just wanted to put a couple pictures that I found. Part of our mitigation was to digitize all this historic photographs that the Corps had, and we just had them probably in boxes. And so we're hoping eventually create a website where people can have access to this sort of materials that we have in our archives and are not able to share. And that's actually Lock-in-Dam number 3 while being built. As part of this project, we excavated the LEETSDALE site. And from what I know, I mean, I've only been here a year, but it appears this is the biggest archaeological undertaking that Pittsburgh District has ever done. We did multiple data recoveries on this site. This was the site used for casting the dam for Braddock. So we replaced the dam there, and that's where the casting basin was used. So that area was excavated to be used as a cast site, and then the site there was they did multiple data recoveries, and so by far it seems to be the biggest archaeological undertaking that we've done as a district. Finally, another project I wanted to talk to you because it's happening as well right now is the Upper Ohio Navigation Project. We are still very early in the kind of execution part. We are the main goal of this project is to expand the locks chambers at the Dashiell's, Montgomery, in Emsworth locks and dams to be able to fit bigger and longer barges. Right now, this locks and dams were built in the 1930s, and then the barges were smaller. Now we're working with bigger barges, and they have to double lock. Basically, they split the barges and they anchor some in one side, pass the first half, then the tugboat has to turn back around through the lock, pick up the other set of barges and pass through again. The idea is to make them longer so they can just go in one swoop. As part of this project, because it requires so much material to be constructed in concrete, we are building our concrete batch in adjacent to the locks and dam. And right now we're actually doing a phase 2 evaluation in this site. It's 36 BB, it's in Beaver County. 131 is in a historical, we believe, I was just there last Tuesday, believes it was probably built in 1860s, around that time. Right now, we just have the foundation in just, it appears to have been salvaged. There's not much, the stones are not there. So maybe the archaeologists on site believe that maybe they were salvaged and used in some adjacent houses nearby. But that's where kind of we expand our view in a little bit, because this property where it's at is one of the areas we're looking into potentially purchasing or getting an easement of some kind to build this batch plant. And so before that, we have to kind of do Section 106 and clear everything out. And so that's kind of where I've been like bouncing here and there. I do, it's my job description and position that I do a lot of internal core projects and then this bigger kind of civil works sites. And I wanted to include this just in case you ever want, because like Ethan and Eva call, like I can only do so much, and then we end up contracting out or trying to look for local partnerships with universities and organizations. And I know other sides of my district, especially in the environmental studies sides, they have partnered a lot with local universities. And I know in the past we did, and that's something that we want to bring back again to kind of get involved with the communities that we have and kind of just take advantage of both of us. And so I just want to throw that out there. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. We do have a couple questions here. Before we get too far off the LEETSDALE site, there was another site that was comparable to it, a deeply stratified site, 36 BV 380, where the applicant decided not to go forward with doing a phase 3 excavation, and instead they decided to do some alternative mitigation, and that is how we are going to have PA Share, which is going to be our all-inclusive electronic submittal system for the state of Pennsylvania. So thank you, Pittsburgh District. I think that may lead into our first question from, and this is for all districts, from Mark Durante. What happens on a CAP Section 14 project when it becomes apparent that they are going to significantly impact a National Register listed site and the data recovery could cost over $1 million? And this is all known during the FID phase.
Yeah, so I can take a stab at that. So if something like that, or if that situation was to occur and that was known that was going to happen, if it is that expensive, depending on the project, that could push it out of economic feasibility. And the project, FID stands for Federal Interest Determination. So if it was that expensive, it could push that out, and it wouldn't be in the federal interest to keep going with that project. So I mean, one potential solution or one potential thing that could happen is the project doesn't go forward, or another solution is that you find some sort of alternative that avoids that cost or avoids impacting that site as much as you want it to.
All right, also from Mark. At what point do you offer a deed of gift to private landowners to donate artifacts to the proper curation facility?
So I could talk, like, for example, for that phase 2 evaluation that we're doing right now, because it is private property, the landowner is the proper owner of those artifacts. And what we can do is I sat with, well, we didn't sit because it was an outdoor meeting because of COVID. So we talked outside about the proper, basically his options. He has the property owner, he has the option of keeping them if he wants to. He can also donate them to the museum. And I brought those forms. I explained that for the phase 1 survey, it was a different property owner. They chose to donate them. So that's kind of as far I can. And because it's a private property, we can only do so much about requesting. And that's what I kind of mostly try to tell them, even if you don't want them after you look at them, then he finds out it's a bunch of brick or something that he doesn't want. Like, here are the places that I'll recommend for you to take him in, was basically the Pennsylvania Museum.
Excellent. No other questions. I guess I have a question not really related to anything of your job duties, but in terms of looting on core property, how is that enforced? And are you ever brought into maybe evaluating or assessing the damage done by looters to press charges if charges are ever pushed?
Baltimore District, I don't know if Philly or Pittsburgh ever has, but I know, and Baltimore District has not, but I know that other districts, I believe Mobile successfully prosecuted some looters. They actually partnered with the Department of Justice and actually flew in tribal members from a removed tribe in Oklahoma to testify, and actually won a case and were able to prove that they had been looting a mound site on core property. So I don't know of it ever going that far. I mean, it is part of our job duties is, looking at ARPA cases, but as far, I don't know any of our other districts, but I do know that other core districts have successfully gone after looters and have taken it to court. And now we're looking sort of as a cultural community of practice nationwide, sort of what can we learn and best practices from some of those successes. So Nikki or Michelle, have y'all ever had any issues in your districts that you know of?
I have not had, I mean, I know we have issues in the district, but I have not done, it's like one of those things. Working, and it's very different. When I was working with the Forest Service, we did have our own law enforcement officers at the forest level. They work for the Forest Service, and they were law enforcement officers that we train on ARPA, and we actually went to trainings together for ARPA. So it's kind of cool to learn the forensic side of things. But here in the Corps, it's very different because we don't have law enforcement. We do have rangers that are on site, but they are not law enforcement. They're just, people like us. And I know other districts, they have kind of make partnerships with other agencies that are immediately adjacent to Corps land, like sometimes it's BLM or Forest Service, because they do have that ability to have patrols, and that's how they are kind of helping with that, because they say like a lot of land and not a lot of people and eyes to watch over. So I've not had one here. We are actually, but we will be starting to like kind of training our rangers. It's part of like this cultural resources management plan. We're going to kind of use that to kind of also train our rangers to look for different signs and see how. Yeah, it's a hard.
Thank you. We have another question from Jonathan Libben. Can you talk about the Corps' approach to tribal consultation? And as a follow-up, is there anything that we as cultural resource professionals working with applicants can do to support this effort?
I can talk about this. So I'm also the tribal liaison for Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, because we do a lot of our own kind of projects, it's more minimal stuff. We've done a lot of our cultural tribal consultation projects. In my experience from Charleston, when I had a lot of regulatory and private projects that just needed a regulatory permit, we always let it up to tribal consultation. Government to government comes from the agency to the tribal chief, or the tribal nation. But however, some applicants in Charleston district had a really good relationship with the Catawba Nation, which was our local nation in South Carolina. And they did a lot of, it was more informal consultation with them. So sometimes, and if you think about regulatory projects, most of the times these projects haven't been planned for years before it even gets to going through the permitting process. So they have talked to them. So by the time we went in to consult with them, like they already had talks before at an informal level. So I think that's the way that their contractors were helping them kind of, you can't get ahead of the process, but at least create flatten those wrinkles before we get involved. But I don't know if anyone wants.
Anybody want to add anything?
Well, I know, for my civil works support, I guess, I just try to loop tribes in as early as possible. So, once, I guess once project initiation notices are sent out, I send that to them. But definitely, at least when we have specific alternatives that we know what areas will be impacted and what exactly we're doing, so I can send them something specific that they can review. I loop them in as early as I can.
Yeah, for planning projects, we do the same thing. We reach out to them with the initial scoping letter. And then as we move through, when we get to the focused array of alternatives and kind of when we're pulling things together. But any of the phase 1As that I pull together, or even if it's a 1B or more, they're all presented with those. I've spoken with each of the tribal reviewers. They want to kind of keep it on their level for the regulatory permit actions. So that's usually just the email, PDF versions of things, and kind of keeping, that open line of communication.
Yeah, you kind of cut out there at the end, or it did on my end anyway. I think I got it there. You said that you, for most regulatory projects, they like to keep it on the government to government level?
No, they kind of would like to keep it between me as the tribal liaison and the 106 reviewers, or the TIPOs. So they don't really require any like uplift to the chief directly,
Oh, I
but
see
that
what you're saying.
is always still there if we have some issues.
So to address Jonathan's second half of his question, do you see any opportunities for consultants to help with tribal consultation?
Well, I don't see that it would be anything. I don't think it would be in a kind of a problem if the same kind of situation that Pittsburgh District had, where they're doing that earlier coordination on a less formal way. But I definitely think that once it comes to the Corps of Engineers, there has to be some sort of relatively formal outreach if that is required from the reviewers themselves. So if they're like, this is the time we need to, put this to the leaders, then I'll put our DE in touch with the leadership.
Thank you. Another question from Ben Resnick. What are the requirements for reporting versus non-reporting projects?
That sounds like a Glenn question.
And Glenn's taking himself off mute. Under the SPGP, if you read you have to go into the permit. There is a slew of reasons that can be why a programmatic permit can be reporting. I believe right now we're up to 31 of them for the PA SPGP, and they can range from anything from being an impact threshold. Right now for SPGP 5, they think any impact over a half acre could be non-compliance with endangered species, could have a 106 issue. It might need a 408 review. Just a host of possible reasons why it would come to the Corps instead of being completely processed by the PADEP.
Right. Yeah. The Corps is certainly complex, but the DEP gives them a run for their money. Does anybody have any other questions? Yeah, so let me speak real quick if nobody else has any other questions. The original intent of this symposium was to get our core archaeologists and our core regulators in the same room with the PAC membership. It's been a while since Philadelphia or any other districts had presented, if they ever had. Michelle, Eva, and Ethan are relatively new to the area, so I thought it would be a good opportunity for everybody to get to know each other. It's unfortunate that we're doing it over a Zoom meeting and we're not able to go hit a bar after this, but I think it was a worthwhile symposium, and I think that other things than this, like Hannah's Archaeology Month content, PAC membership is trying to generate worthwhile content for its membership. So if you're on this Zoom meeting and you're not a PAC member, I urge you to become a PAC member. The more voices we have, the more diversity we have, the better able we are to generate content that is relevant to you as a professional in the state of Pennsylvania. I think that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions, comments, etc.?
I just wanted to say thank you to PAC for inviting us.
Thank you.
We talk to Nikki and Michelle, every once in a while, but it's nice to see them and get to hear what they're doing too. So this was a nice treat for us as well.
Well, thank you. Like I say, I can't thank you enough. Very informative, especially the regulatory part, but also just to learn about what you guys do in your districts. We go about our work not really knowing what everybody else does, but we think we know what they're doing. So I really appreciate it.